So there I was, standing on what I can only describe as the universe's most depressing game show stage, except instead of winning a toaster, someone was about to win me. Lucky them, right? Go. The Galactic Commodity Exchange had all the charm of a used car lot crossed with a morgue. Fluorescent lights that could make a supermodel look like a corpse, and the delightful aroma of desperation mixed with industrial cleaning fluid. Real 5-star establishment. Next item, lot 247, announced the auctioneer, a blob-like creature whose voice sounded like gravel in a blender. One Zelanian female, age 26 standard cycles, fully trained in 17 domestic protocols. That would be me, Zara. Former princess of a dead world, current property of whoever had the most credits burning a hole in their pocket. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. The crowd was your typical collection of galactic scumbags. There was Grex the Hutt knockoff, whose idea of fine dining probably involved eating his servants. A group of Centaurian merchants who looked like they'd calculated my resale value before I'd even finished being described. And don't get me started on the Vorthan military officer whose uniform was shinier than his non-existent moral compass. Bidding starts at 5,000 credits, Blob voice continued. 5,000. I'd seen starships sell for less. Granted, they were probably held together with duct tape and prayers, but still. 6,000. Called out Grex, his multiple chins jiggling with excitement. 7. The Centaurians weren't going to be outdone. And then, because the universe apparently has a twisted sense of humor, a human wandered in. Now, I'd heard about humans, of course. Everyone had. The newcomers who'd just figured out faster than light travel and were stumbling around the galaxy like tourists with their phones out, taking pictures of everything. This one looked exactly like the stereotype, brown hair that screamed I forgot to pack a comb, clothes that were clean but clearly not designed for space station fashion, and an expression that suggested he'd taken a wrong turn somewhere and ended up in hell's waiting room. He stood there gawking at the proceedings like he'd never seen an auction before. Which, knowing humans and their adorably backwards morality, he probably hadn't. 8,000. The Vorthan's bid snapped me back to reality. The human's mouth fell open. He turned to a nearby Centaurian and said something that made the alien laugh in that condescending way that suggested he'd just asked where the bathroom was during a funeral. 9,000. Grex was getting serious now. The human raised his hand, probably to ask a question, and Blob Voice's eyes lit up like he'd just spotted a particularly juicy fly. 10,000 to the human gentleman. The human's face went through more expressions than a silent movie actor. Confusion, horror, panic, and then a look that clearly said, "Oh no, what have I done?" But it was too late. The damage was done, and I had a sinking feeling that my life had just gotten significantly more complicated. Going once, going twice, Blob Voice was practically salivating. The human was frantically waving his hands, trying to signal that he hadn't meant to bid, but in auction house body language, that just looked like enthusiastic bidding. Sold to the human for 10,000 credits. And just like that, I had a new owner. Fantastic. From the frying pan into the, well, probably another frying pan, but at least this one was confused. The human looked like he was about to throw up, which was honestly refreshing. Most of my previous owners had looked smug or calculating. Nausea was definitely an upgrade. They dragged me off the platform, slapped some chains on my wrists because apparently the universe hadn't reached peak cliché yet, and shoved me toward my new owner. He stared at me like I was a particularly complicated math problem. He said, which was already more conversation than I'd had with some owners. I think there's been a mistake. No mistake, friend. A new voice joined our little party. Merchant Vex slithered over, and I use that term literally because he was basically a snake with arms and a suit that probably cost more than most planets' GDP. Congratulations on your purchase. One prime Zelanian, house-trained and everything. House-trained. Like I was a pet. I was seriously considering whether those chains were strong enough to strangle someone with. "No, you don't understand," the human said, his voice climbing toward panic. "I didn't mean to buy, I mean you can't sell people." Vex's laugh sounded like a garbage disposal eating silverware. "Oh, you're one of those humans. How delightfully naive. Son, slavery's been legal in 87% of galactic space for the last 3,000 years. It's a cornerstone of our economy." The human's face went through several more expressions, finally settling on something between disgust and determination. "Well, then I'm freeing her." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not a happy laugh, mind you. More like the sound you make when you realize the universe's idea of a joke is your entire existence. "Free me?" I said, speaking for the first time since this whole circus began. "That's adorable. Really, but in case you missed the fine print, I'm legally your property now. Even if you tear up my ownership papers, I'm still a runaway slave. Bounty hunters would have me back in chains before you could say Universal Declaration of Sentient Rights." The human stared at me, then at Vex, then back at me. You could practically see his brain trying to process this information. "There's got to be something," he started. "Well, Vex said, suddenly interested in being helpful. "You could always take her to human space. I hear you people have some quaint laws about personal freedom. Of course, that's assuming you could get there without being arrested for slave theft, which carries a penalty of immediate execution in most sectors." Great. My new owner was either going to get us both killed or sold back into slavery within a week. This was shaping up to be just another stellar chapter in the disaster novel that was my life. The human looked at me again, and something in his expression changed. Less panic, more resolve. "What's your name?" he asked. I blinked. In 5 years of slavery, exactly 0 owners had bothered to ask that question. "Zara," I said, despite myself. "I'm Jake," he said, and then did something that made my brain short-circuit. He held out his hand for me to shake. "Nice to meet you, Zara. And I promise you we're going to figure this out." Oh no, he was actually serious about this whole freedom thing, which meant he was either the kindest person in the galaxy or completely insane. Probably both. "So let me get this straight," I said, as we sat in the station's least grimy cantina, which was like being the tallest building in a valley. "You're a tourist, you've got no idea how galactic law works, and your grand plan is to just fly me to human space and hope for the best?" Jake nodded enthusiastically while trying to eat what the menu optimistically called a sandwich. I used the term loosely, since it appeared to be fighting back. "That's about the size of it, yeah. And you realize that between here and human space, there are approximately 15 different sectors where possession of stolen slave property is punishable by spacing?" "Spacing?" "They throw you out an airlock." His sandwich suddenly became less interesting. "No?" "Oh. Mania." Not to mention the bounty hunters, slave trackers, and various pirates who make a living returning lost property to their rightful owners. For a fee, of course. Jake put down his sandwich entirely. "Okay, so it's not a great plan." "It's not a plan at all. It's a suicide note with extra steps. But here's the thing about hope. It's like a particularly stubborn infection. You think you've gotten rid of it, and then it shows up again at the worst possible moment. And watching this human genuinely struggle with the concept that slavery was legal was starting to reinfect me with something I hadn't felt in years. "Look," Jake said, leaning forward. "Maybe I don't understand galactic law, and maybe this is crazy, but I can't just leave you here. That's not who I am." "Who you are is irrelevant," I said. But even as the words came out, they felt wrong. This is reality. This is how the universe works. Then maybe the universe needs to be reminded that it's working wrong. And there it was. The kind of naive idealism that gets people killed. The kind of thinking that made me want to either hug him or slap him. Possibly both. Fine, I said, because apparently I was infected with his particular brand of stupid. But if we're doing this, we do it smart. No more wandering into slave auctions, no more accidentally buying people, and definitely no more announcing our plans where anyone can hear. Jake's face lit up like I'd just agreed to help him overthrow the Galactic government. Which, in a way, I guess I had. So what do we need to do? I pulled out my ownership papers, those delightful documents that reduced my entire existence to a legal transaction. First, we need to get to your ship without anyone realizing that the happy tourist just became a slave smuggler. Second, we need to plot a course that avoids the major trade routes and enforcement zones. And third, we need to pray to whatever deities you humans believe in that we make it to your space before someone notices I'm missing. What happens if someone notices? I looked at him seriously. Remember what I said about spacing? Right. Don't get caught. Don't get caught, I agreed. As we got up to leave, I caught sight of our reflection in the cantina's grimy mirror. A human and his newly purchased alien slave, walking toward an uncertain future. Except for one detail that made all the difference. He wasn't walking ahead of me like an owner. He was walking beside me like an equal. It was a small thing, probably meaningless in the grand scheme of the universe. But after 5 years of being treated like cargo, it felt revolutionary. Maybe Jake's naive idealism was contagious. Maybe I was finally cracking under the pressure. Or maybe, just maybe, this ridiculous human actually meant what he said about freedom. Either way, I was about to find out. Of course, nothing ever goes according to plan. That's probably carved somewhere in the Galactic Constitution, right between slavery is totally fine and the universe has a sense of humor, and it's terrible. We'd made it exactly halfway to Jake's ship when the station's security alarm started blaring. Now, this could have been anything. Reactor leak, pirate attack, someone forgetting to pay their docking fees. But given my luck lately, I had a sinking feeling it was about us. Think that's for us? Jake asked, trying to sound casual and failing spectacularly. Well, let's see. We're fleeing the scene of a questionable slave purchase. You're obviously new to this whole crime thing, and I literally have ownership papers with your name on them. What do you think? Before he could answer, 3 figures rounded the corner ahead of us. Bounty hunters, and not the charming, roguish kind you see in movies. These were the sort who collected trophies from their captures and probably had pain as my business embroidered on their underwear. Jake Morrison, the leader, a Krillian with more scars than skin, held up a holo display. You're under arrest for slave theft. Slave theft? Jake looked genuinely confused. But I bought her legally. Legally, yes. But you failed to register the transfer with the Galactic Commerce Authority within the mandatory 6-hour window. That makes her stolen property. I grabbed Jake's arm. Run. To his credit, he didn't argue. We spun around and bolted back the way we came, which would have been great if there hadn't been another group of bounty hunters waiting for us. This way, I yanked him into a maintenance corridor that was barely wide enough for one person, let alone 2 people fleeing for their lives. How did you know about this passage? Jake panted as we squeezed through pipes and conduits. 5 years of slavery teaches you to notice every possible escape route, I said. Most of them don't work, but you remember them anyway. We emerged into the station's commercial district, right into the middle of what appeared to be an alien food court. The various species eating their lunches looked up at us with the universal expression of people who really didn't want to get involved in whatever drama was unfolding. Sorry, Jake called out as we sprinted between tables. Tourist emergency. A Centaurian vendor tentacle slapped him as we ran past. No running in the food court. Tell that to the bounty hunters. I shouted back. Speaking of which, they'd found us again. The Krillian leader crashed through the same maintenance corridor we'd used, looking significantly less graceful than we had. His buddies came from the other direction, trapping us in the middle of the food court. End of the line, Scarface growled. Hand over the property, human. And that's when something interesting happened. Jake stepped in front of me. Now, I'd seen plenty of owners defend their property before, usually because it represented a financial investment. But Jake wasn't looking at me like I was his investment. He was looking at the bounty hunters like they were threatening his friend. Her name is Zara, he said quietly, and she's not property. The law says otherwise. Then the law is wrong. The Krillian laughed, a sound like metal scraping against stone. You humans and your morality. This is the real universe, son. Morality doesn't pay the bills. Maybe not, Jake said, and I could see him thinking frantically. But I bet keeping your license does. The bounty hunter paused. What? You said I failed to register the transfer, right? That makes this a civil matter, not criminal. Bounty hunters can only pursue criminal fugitives. Taking civil action against a legal purchaser? That's vigilantism. I'm pretty sure the Galactic Commerce Authority frowns on that. I stared at Jake. For a tourist, he was picking up galactic law disturbingly quickly. The Krillian's certainty wavered. That's you can't. Check your contract, Jake said with growing confidence. I'll wait. Che. While Scarface fumbled with his communicator, I leaned over to Jake. Please tell me you actually know what you're talking about. Not a clue, he whispered back. But they don't know that. The bounty hunter's face went through several expressions before settling on frustrated rage. This isn't over, human. Actually, it is, Jake said. Civil disputes go through arbitration, not bounty hunters. Have a nice day. As the hunter stalked away, muttering about lawyers and paperwork, I looked at Jake with something approaching respect. Not bad for a tourist. I may have accidentally watched a few legal dramas during the flight here, he admitted. Well, your television education just saved our lives. Now, can we please get to your ship before they figure out you were bluffing? We ran. Jake's ship was, well, calling it a ship was generous. It looked like someone had welded a cargo container to a warp drive and hoped for the best. But it was fueled, functional, and most importantly, it was ours. Welcome aboard the Wandering Star, Jake said as we strapped in for departure. She's not much to look at, but she's faster than she appears. She'd have to be, I muttered, looking at the duct tape holding the navigation console together. But you know what? As we lifted off from that station, watching it shrink in the rear display, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 5 years. Relief. Even if this tin can fell apart around us, even if we got caught, even if this whole crazy plan failed spectacularly, for right now, in this moment, I wasn't anyone's property. So, Jake said once we'd jumped to hyperspace, tell me about yourself. The real you, not the auction house description. I almost laughed. What's to tell? Former princess of a dead world, current refugee/former slave. It's not exactly an inspiring story. Princess? My planet got invaded when I was 21. The hegemony doesn't bother with prisoners of war when they can sell them as slaves instead. I'd been passed around for 5 years like a particularly expensive party favor. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm sorry. Don't be. Self-pity doesn't pay the bills, and it definitely doesn't change anything. Maybe not, but that doesn't mean what happened to you was okay. I looked at him, this ridiculous human who'd accidentally bought a slave and was now risking his life to free her. What about you? What's a tourist doing in the armpit of the galaxy? Honestly? I was supposed to be on a guided tour of the inner worlds. Safe, sanitized, approved for human consumption. But I got bored and wandered off. And ended up buying a person. And ended up meeting you, he corrected. Which, despite the circumstances, I'm starting to think might be the best thing that's happened to me in years. That was not what I'd expected him to say. I'd braced myself for pity or awkwardness, or the kind of noble sentiment that sounds nice but means nothing. Instead, he'd said something that sounded suspiciously like he actually meant it. You realize this is insane, right? I said. You're throwing away your nice, safe tourist vacation to help someone you just met. Yeah, well, maybe I needed a little insanity in my life. We talked through most of the journey. It's about his life on Earth, about my memories of Zelanian before the invasion, about the vast gulf between human idealism and galactic reality. He told me about his job designing environmental systems for space habitats, his dream of seeing the galaxy, his shock at discovering how cruel that galaxy could be. I told him about my education in xenobiology, my work in the Royal Gardens, the day the bombs started falling. Things I hadn't talked about in years, because slaves don't get to have conversations about their past. You know, Jake said as we approached the border of human space, I've been thinking. That's dangerous. What if this doesn't end when we reach Earth? What if we could actually do something about all this? I raised an eyebrow. Such as? I don't know. Start an organization. Fund refugee efforts. Show the galaxy that not everyone thinks slavery is acceptable. Jake, I stopped. I'd been about to say impossible, naive, pointless. But looking at him, remembering everything that had happened, a different word came to mind. That's exactly the kind of thing a human would say. Is that good or bad? Before I could answer, proximity alarms started screaming. 3 ships had dropped out of hyperspace behind us, and they were closing fast. Bounty hunters? Jake asked. I checked the scanner. Worse. Hegemony warships. They're not here to arrest us. What are they here for? I looked at him grimly. To make sure the Galactic Commerce Authority gets their property back. One way or another. The lead ship was hailing us. Jake looked at me, and I nodded. He opened the channel. Attention, human vessel. You are harboring stolen hegemony property. Surrender immediately or be destroyed. Jake looked at the scanner showing human patrol ships just minutes away, then at me, then back at the communication panel. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Wandering Star, he said. I'm not harboring stolen property. I'm transporting a free citizen to safety. You have 10 seconds to comply. Jake's hand hovered over the weapon controls. The Wandering Star wasn't armed for combat, but she had a few surprises. Zara, he said quietly, whatever happens, I want you to know that meeting you changed everything for me. I reached over and took his hand. Then let's make sure it changes everything for them too. Part 6. Freedom and New Beginnings. What followed was less a battle and more a very expensive game of keep away. The Wandering Star might have looked like a flying scrap heap, but Jake had apparently spent his environmental systems budget on some very illegal engine modifications. We dodged, weaved, and generally made ourselves as difficult to catch as possible while broadcasting distress signals to the human patrol ships. The hegemony vessels were faster and better armed, but they had one crucial disadvantage. They were firing on a human citizen in human space. This is Captain Rodriguez of the U.S. Defender, came a welcome voice over the comm. Hegemony vessels, you are in violation of human territorial space, and withdraw immediately. We are retrieving stolen property, the hegemony commander responded. This does not concern you. Everything in human space concerns us. Stand down. No. What followed was a tense standoff that ended when 3 more human ships dropped out of hyperspace. The hegemony vessels, outnumbered and technically in the wrong, withdrew with threats about diplomatic consequences and trade sanctions. Wandering Star, this is Captain Rodriguez. Are you all right? Jake looked at me and grinned. We are now. 2 hours later, we were sitting in a debriefing room on Frontier Station, the outermost human outpost. Captain Rodriguez, a woman who looked like she'd fought her way through half the galaxy to get her rank, was reviewing our story with the expression of someone trying to decide if we were heroes or idiots. So let me understand this, she said. You accidentally bought a slave, decided to free her, fought your way off a space station, outran bounty hunters, and made it to human space pursued by warships. All because you believe slavery is wrong. That's about the size of it, Jake said. And you, she turned to me, you're a former princess turned refugee who's been enslaved for 5 years. Also accurate. Captain Rodriguez leaned back in her chair. Well, the good news is that the moment you entered human space, all slave contracts became null and void. Legally, you're a free citizen with full rights and protections. I felt something inside me that I'd thought was dead finally flicker back to life. The bad news, she continued, is that this is going to cause a diplomatic incident. The hegemony is furious, the Commerce Authority is threatening sanctions, and half the Galactic Council is demanding your return. And? Jake asked. And they can all go file a complaint with the Department of We Don't Care. Human space, human laws. If they don't like it, they're welcome to avoid our territory. She stood up and extended her hand to me. Welcome to freedom, Zara. It's been a long time coming. I shook her hand, and for the first time in 5 years, no one owned me. No papers, no contracts, no legal obligations. I was just me. So what now? Jake asked as we left the station. I looked at him, this impossible human who'd changed my life by refusing to accept that the universe was cruel and unfair. Who'd seen a person where everyone else saw property. Well, I said, someone mentioned something about starting an organization, showing the galaxy that not everyone thinks slavery is acceptable. His face lit up. You're serious? Completely. Though I should warn you, it's going to be dangerous, expensive, and probably impossible. Sounds perfect. 6 months later, the Free Citizen Foundation had offices on 12 human worlds and was funding refugee efforts across 3 sectors. Jake had quit his job and thrown himself into the work with typical human enthusiasm. I'd discovered I had a talent for organizing logistics and a deep satisfaction in helping other former slaves find freedom. You know, I said one evening as we reviewed applications for asylum, when I was standing on that auction block, if someone had told me I'd end up here, I'd have thought they were insane. Insane is pretty much the human condition, Jake said. We specialize in impossible things. Is that why you helped me? Because humans like impossible causes? He looked at me seriously. I helped you because slavery is wrong and because you deserved better. But I stayed because somewhere along the way I realized I couldn't imagine doing this work with anyone else. I leaned over and kissed him, because some moments call for action rather than words. So, I said when we broke apart, what's our next impossible project? Jake grinned and pulled up a star chart. I was thinking we could liberate an entire planet. Just one? How modest of you. I figure we should start small and work our way up. I laughed, the sound echoing through our little office on the edge of human space. Outside, ships were arriving and departing, carrying freed slaves to new lives, supplies to refugee camps, and hope to places where it had been forgotten. The universe was still cruel and unfair. Slavery was still legal in most of galactic space. The hegemony still treated sentient beings like property, and the Commerce Authority still profited from misery. But in this one small corner of space, 2 unlikely partners were proving that sometimes just sometimes naive idealism could change the world. Even if it started with accidentally buying someone at auction. After all, everyone needs a hobby,